He's always very good, like Alan and Mikey, and will present for me. And he said, I will pick something. And so I specifically waited for him to pick, and he did not pick, and so I picked for him. And I told him I did have an ulterior motive. I really wanted him to talk about dwarfs because I raised them. So Cindy is giving a handout for you guys that I'm going to covet and cherish. My husband and I do raise Hollands and dwarfs, and I love them. And so this one is actually not named, and I picked it, so Scott has no idea what it is, what sex it is, whose it is, or anything like that. So he is going to talk about dwarfs.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Stacy. This is my second time having the honor of speaking at Louisiana Judges Conference I did with Alan 2 years ago, I think, when they first did. So it's just a real honor to be able to come back and do this. And as Stacy did say, I didn't give an answer right away, but she came up with something that I would have come up with anyway, because Netherland dwarfs are obviously a breed very near and dear to my heart, along with Holland lops. My friend Alan always kind of calls them cousin breeds, very closely related in the body type that you're looking for, the headset you're looking for. And so it's this is my first opportunity to really delve into doing a presentation on dwarfs. I've done Holland so many times, so it's actually kind of refreshing. So I didn't do a PowerPoint yet. I did a handout as I kind of fine-tune what I wanted to talk about. And so since we're kind of getting late in the evening, I wanted to kind of do hit the high points. And I appreciate all the other fellow presenters that really got in depth to satin colors. And I also had the benefit of having Paula and Alan present on dwarf type breeds. So I think from them you got a sense of the head on a dwarf type breed. The breed characteristic is a very round head. So I wanted to just kind of hit a few high points on our dwarfs. So I've broken it down into a first sort of a general overview of dwarf type, which, like I said, we had a really good discussion with Paula on the dwarf hotos, and Alan, of course, on the fuzzy lops to really hit that dwarf characteristic. And it really is something unique to the dwarf type rabbits with that bigger, rounder head, which is part of that dwarfing gene that gives them that look, something different than a New Zealand head or a Havana head that has a whole different sort of genetic makeup. And then I was going to talk just a little bit about, from a judge perspective, fine-tuning your placements in a class with general dwarf type in mind, and I'll go through that pretty quickly since what we really want to talk about is our overview of dwarf type. So just our standard is our Bible for any breed. That's what we always refer to from the very beginning, and I just wanted to point out there are 70 points in the dwarf standard of the 100 points that are allocated to type. So the remaining would be fur and condition and those types of things. But so 35 points are allocated to the body type, and 35 points are allocated to head, ear, and the eye. So you have just as many points on this part of the rabbit as you do on the front end of the rabbit. So it's almost equal weight to those sort of point allocations. So first I'll talk about the body. And
Sorry.
it's okay.
You have mood lighting.
Yes. So I'll talk really quickly. So the body is 35 points, and we want it to be, again, with the fuzzy lops, the dwarf hotos, short and compact. And I think Mikey said in any of those dwarf type breeds, you're going to have those two words almost at the very beginning, short and compact, or compact and short. But it also says it is well-rounded. So we want a body that is very short and well-rounded in that hindquarter. And Mike Abissing, when he was talking about posing and handling, is to really see a nice, and this one has a very nice, well-rounded hindquarter. A lot of times in a dwarf body, when you're evaluating them, you'll see they're very high at the shoulder and then they slope off the hindquarter, or they're very flat at the hindquarter. So those are two big type faults that you really kind of want to avoid, because we're looking for a nice, well-rounded animal from all directions, the head and the body. So we want that to be very well-rounded in that hindquarter, not flat. Another big key point I really want to highlight on a dwarf is the shoulders are to be equal width as the hindquarter. And most breeds, even in a Holland, will talk about a wide shoulder but a slight taper to that hindquarter. And on these, we want the same width from that shoulder carried through a nice midsection and transitioning to the same width at that hindquarter. So that's a really important sort of aspect of dwarf type. If they're too narrow in the shoulder, they could have a fairly decent headset, but they're not going to have that. Usually they'll be maybe a little shorter, a little lower to the table, a little more of a medium headset if they have that weaker shoulder. We want to see a nice width from the shoulder all the way to that hindquarter. So that's really one of the important aspects of the dwarf body that I really wanted to kind of hit on. So we want it short, we want it round. We want the same width at the shoulder, and we want that same width carried into that hindquarter. So no taper whatsoever on these guys. So common type faults on the body would be low shoulders that lack depth. We saw that in Paula's demonstration on the dwarf hodos. A head we want that head set high on the body, as Alan was talking about in the fuzzy laps, how to allocate that fault to the head or to the shoulder. Well, in the dwarf standard, it does talk about it in the body where you want that head set high on the shoulder. So major common type faults you'll see are low shoulders that lack depth, a head that's set in front of the shoulder instead of on top of the shoulder, or a rabbit with a long neck. Like you really want a dwarf that doesn't have a neck at all. So sometimes the longer neck rabbits will be longer in the shoulder, and that head will be set in front of the shoulder instead of more correctly like this, where it's just nice and on the shoulders, and it gives that nice headset, which we've talked about the evolution of breeds throughout the years. These just come across with a more showy look. Also, our standard talks about a wide chest, and so that higher headset is going to give that nice view of a wide chest, which goes hand in hand with those nice wide shoulders. Okay, and then flat hips, where it doesn't have the roundness over that hindquarter, or a high point that comes too far, which causes that slope. So that's the first 35 type points on the body. The next are a combination of head, ears, and eyes taken together, come up with 35 points as well. So a head has 15 points, and we want, the key word is roundness from every direction. You want the curvature of the skull, you want the width at the brow carried all the way down to the width at that well-filled lower muzzle, as Alan had some good depictions of head shape in a fuzzy lap. The fuzzies obviously have more points allocated to head, but if we can kind of keep in mind a fuzzy lap head, that roundness, we really want to see that in our dwarfs with the wide brow and the full muzzle. Our standard says, Alan talked about headhunters in these dwarf breeds with the Hollands, the dwarfs, people that are, and a beautiful big round head is so appealing. But we want to, in a dwarf, it's not necessarily the largest head that matters or that's important. We want it to be in balance. Our standard says the head should be large, but in balance with the body. So 15 points on that nice round head. So many dwarfs these days I'm seeing are very elongated in that head, and that goes along with Alan's diagram of the width and the height being equal to create that roundness. A lot I'm seeing are becoming very elongated in the muzzle, which is throwing off the whole head shape. You're losing that nice round look to the head. So that throws off the geometry of the head. Let's see. Then we go to ears. Ears, very important distinguishing characteristic on this breed because they are a smaller dwarf. Ideal length of 2 inches is what we want. 2.5 is, more than 2.5 is a DQ. But again, there are 5 different components to an ear. So we have 15 points on ears, and that's broken down into length, the shape, the ear set, the furring, and the substance. And so these are all, when you're evaluating a dwarf, really get in there and look at that ear for the length. Again, an ideal of 2. The shape has to be rounded at the tip. The ear set, we want them set on top of the head, not back. A lot of them are naturally set back like that, but we want that erect and set right on top of the head. The furring, we want them well furred. You'll see a lot of faulted animals that have lack furring on that ear, that are very thin and folded in that ear, and a nice substance to that ear, which just gives that more pleasing look than something that has very thin folded ears, very long ears, or ears that are out of balance. So that's that 15 on head, 15 on ear. And as a judge, you'll impress the dwarf breeders if you do get in there and really give a good evaluation of the ear, especially the shape. You really want a nice rounded at the tip to give that nice look to that ear. And then also we have 5 points allocated to the eye. And on these, I think it goes along with that nice dwarf gene that just gives that sort of extreme look that sets our rabbits apart. So we have 5 points on eye, and I'd really encourage you, I think as dwarf breeders, we're losing a little bit of that bold eye. We want it open, we want it big in relation to the head, and I just think it's more aesthetically pleasing to see that nice bold eye. So really try to focus on that in a breeding program. I'm seeing so many eyes get really small or very squinty eyes, which I just don't think are very appealing when we're looking at that overall presentation of a pleasing rabbit. So then a quick word about fur. I see so many variations of fur right now in our dwarfs, and I'm on the Dwarf Standards Committee. We're trying to clean some of that up, or just get back to that more correct fur. Let's see. So the correct fur, we want a rollback fur that is soft, dense, and prime with glossiness. So a nice, dense rollback to that coat, very soft. However, we do want to stay away from long, thin fur. You see a lot of that where the rabbit almost has a woolly appearance. And sometimes that can make the bone look even a little more massive or bigger, because that fur is really creating an optical illusion as to the bone of the rabbit. And a lot of them that are just lack that density to that coat. So it really throws off the breed character, as we've kind of talked about on some of our breeds. So really watch that fur to stay away from anything that's really long, that's very thin in density. A quick word about balance. Our dwarf standard, I know the Flemish Giant standard, there's a few others that have a whole paragraph that talk about balance. And the way our dwarf standard tries to bring all of those puzzle pieces, we talk about the Holland Lops, the dwarfs, as being a puzzle piece to put together the head, the ear, the eye, to get that nice roundness. And basically what the balance is saying in our standard is a ideal, pleasing harmony between all the parts. And so, again, talking about headhunters, really refrain as a judge from picking your class winners solely on maybe this big, massive head with full jowls, beautiful wide brow, but then maybe just very long and flat. So clearly the rabbit excels in the department of the head, but really it doesn't have the balance because it's would be longer in the body, and vice versa. Sometimes you'll see a very beautiful, well-bodied animal, but a very plain head, very flat head. So we want to try to seek out the rabbit in the class that's going to have the most balance of those components, and most often it may not be the one with the biggest head in the class, or necessarily the one with a good short body, but maybe a head that's not as big, but that does balance with the body. So those are kind of the high points I wanted to hit on our dwarfs. If we have any questions or any other comments, yes.
When you have a rabbit,
that the backs of the ears don't have a whole lot of fur
Fur,
on. Is that a genetic trait, or is it, do you think
I think
so?
it-
You think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely can be a genetic trait. You want it, ideally in your breeding program, something that's well furred on the entire ear. I do see a lot of that, you're right, where the front of the ear has a sufficient amount of furring, but you really see that back that doesn't.
Kind of
appear to-
naked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we want a uniformity, well furred ear, so,
You know, I have to say, we exhibitors have a joke that runs with us. I'm sure y'all have heard it. We always say when a judge can't find anything nice to say about your rabbit, they say bold eye. But in the Netherlands, I guess it's a real thing. You want a bold eye.
well, you do
So,
want a bold eye.
there
And
you
you
go.
don't want to just call any eye bold, right? I mean,
Gotcha.
you want to be pretty accurate in that. So, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Thank you. All right. And the Scots are so great, we had to have two.
Yeah.